Why is it that so many people think of Ty Cobb not as a ball player, but as a thug who happened to play baseball? For decades, the stories have been the same. Cobb sharpened his spikes to cut opponents. He once killed a man in cold blood. He was a raging racist who despised Jackie Robinson. It's a portrait of pure villainy. But here's the problem. Most of it isn't true. Tonight, we're going to separate the myths from the facts and find out who Ty Cobb really was. The most enduring image of Ty Cobb is a pair of sharp steel spikes flashing high into the air, aimed straight at a helpless infielder. The legend says Cobb kept those spikes filed to a razor's edge, just so he could slice up anyone who dared block his path. It makes for a vicious picture. A madman in a baseball uniform, charging like a bull with knives on his feet. For generations, that story has been told and retold as if it were gospel. But here's the fact. There is no real evidence Cobb ever sharpened his spikes, or that he made a habit of deliberately injuring opponents. Yes, Cobb was aggressive on the base paths, more aggressive than almost anyone who ever played the game. He stole home plate 54 times, a record that still stands. He slid hard, he slid fast, and he played in an era when collisions were part of the sport. Newspaper accounts from his playing days mention plenty of arguments, plenty of fights, but almost never accuse him of taking a knife's edge to his rivals. The image of Cobb as a butcher with cleats? That came later, largely invented by sensational writers who wanted to sell a story. The truth is simpler, and in some ways even more impressive. Ty Cobb terrified infielders, not because he was a criminal with weapons on his shoes, but because he was the fastest, fiercest base runner they had ever seen. The second myth is darker still. For years, people have whispered that Ty Cobb once killed a man. The story usually goes like this. Cobb got into a fight with an African American outside a bar, pulled out a knife, and left the man dead in the street. It's the kind of tale that sticks. Brutal, shocking, perfect for anyone who already wanted to believe Cobb was a monster. But the record tells another story. In 1912, Cobb did get into a violent scuffle in Detroit. A man confronted him, tempers exploded, and Cobb, quick to anger, fought back. Police were called, charges were filed, and the newspapers had a field day. What they did not have was a body. Nobody died that night. Cobb was arrested for assault, not murder. He was fined, but never charged with taking a life. And in all the mountains of court documents and newspaper archives from the time, there is not a single piece of evidence that he ever killed anyone. So where did the murder story come from? Mostly from one man, Al Stump, the ghostwriter who turned Cobb's life into pulp fiction after he retired. Stump embellished, twisted, and outright invented stories that painted Cobb as a killer. Hollywood later picked it up, and before long, the myth became bigger than the truth. The reality? Ty Cobb was a fighter, sometimes too much of one. But a murderer? Number that was a lie designed to sell books, not history. Perhaps the ugliest myth of all is the claim that Ty Cobb was a raging racist. For decades, he's been described as the man who hated black players, the man who would have fought tooth and nail to keep Jackie Robinson out of baseball. It fits the villain's mask perfectly. A violent Southern ball player, born in Georgia in 1886 surely, people say he must have been filled with hatred. But here again, the record refuses to cooperate. In fact, when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, Cobb didn't speak against him. He praised him. Cobb told the press Robinson was a great credit to the game and said he belonged in the big leagues. Historians who dug through Cobb's personal letters found no evidence of him railing against integration. None. The stories of his supposed bigotry trace back, once again, to Al Stump's sensational writings, books, and magazine pieces that shaped the public imagination long after Cobb was gone. Now, was Cobb a saint? Hardly. He was quick-tempered, he fought with teammates, he carried grudges for years. But the idea that he was baseball's poster child for racism simply isn't supported by history. The truth is, Cobb's reputation was poisoned by writers who discovered that racist thug sold better than complicated man. And for nearly half a century, the lie was easier to repeat than the truth. Another story you'll hear is that Ty Cobb was despised by every teammate he ever had, that he sat alone on trains, scowled in the clubhouse, and lived his whole life without a single friend in the game. It's a powerful image. The greatest hitter alive, but so hated that no one could stand to be near him. But history paints a more complicated picture. Yes, Cobb fought with teammates. He feuded with opponents. He had a fiery temper, and more than once, it boiled over. But to say he was universally hated? That simply isn't true. Several of his Detroit teammates, men who played alongside him for years later, spoke fondly of him. Sam Crawford, his longtime rival in the outfield, once called him the best ball player I ever saw. When Cobb retired, players and managers around the league offered tributes that spoke of respect, not contempt. Even Babe Ruth, who had every reason to dislike Cobb, admitted that Cobb's drive and intensity were unmatched. And late in life, Cobb formed genuine friendships with younger players who sought out his advice. So no, Cobb wasn't the loner monster of legend. He was a difficult man, but he wasn't without allies, friends, and even admirers. If the evidence against these myths is so strong, then why do we believe them? The answer comes down to one name: Al Stump. Stump was a writer hired to help Cobb pen his autobiography. But after Cobb's death in 1961, Stump smelled money. He began publishing articles and books that painted Cobb not just as a tough ball player, but as a sadistic, murderous villain. He claimed Cobb carried a pistol everywhere, that he sharpened his spikes like weapons, that he spat racist venom at every opportunity. None of it checked out. Historians who followed up found contradictions, false citations, and in some cases, outright fabrications. But Stump's stories sold. They were dramatic, they were ugly, and they fit the image of a man people already loved to hate. Hollywood jumped on board with the film Cobb in 1994, which leaned heavily on Stump's fiction, and once you put a lie on the big screen, it sticks. For half a century, Al Stump's lies became Ty Cobb's legacy. Only in recent years have serious researchers, people like Charles Learson, gone back to the primary sources, the newspapers, the court documents, and the letters to show the truth. And the truth is this: Cobb was fierce, complicated, and flawed, but he wasn't the monster Stump invented. So who was Ty Cobb, really? He was no angel. He fought too often, he carried grudges, and he lived with a temper that sometimes got the better of him. But he was also one of the greatest hitters the game has ever seen. A man with 4,189 career hits, a lifetime batting average of .366, and a ferocity on the base paths that has never been matched. The myths, the spikes, the murder, the racism, the idea that he was hated by all they made for thrilling headlines and dramatic movies. But history, when you dig deep, tells a quieter, truer story. Ty Cobb was complicated, human, and far from perfect, but he was not the villain that Al Stump and Hollywood told us he was. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here. Baseball is full of legends, but it's also full of myth stories that grow taller with each retelling. If Cobb could be painted as a monster for half a century, what other heroes and villains in baseball history might deserve a second look? The Georgia Peach has been gone for more than 60 years, but the debate over his character still rages. Perhaps that's the ultimate testament to Ty Cobb, that even now, he refuses to be forgotten.